Welcome back to chapter 3 of White Monster. We're going to continue to see if Jordan and Lee are going to make it out of the mountains safely or if they will not make it out of the mountains safely. In chapter 3, I want you to think about what Jordan's reactions are to the problems that he and Lee are facing. Who does he blame, and is he right or wrong to cast the blame on those individuals? Chapter 3. Lee, Jordan announced, I'm going to look beyond that ridge. Maybe I'll see those cabins. You sit tight. Alarm filled Lee's eyes. No, Jordan, don't leave me here. Take it easy, Jordan said. I've got to go take a look. What if those cabins are right over the ridge? We could head over there and not have to sit in my car any longer. But what if you don't come back? Lee argued. What if you get lost in the snow or fall and get hurt? I'd be here all alone. I couldn't stand that, Jordan. I'd go crazy. I'll be careful, Jordan promised. I won't even lose sight of the car. You just stay put, and I'll be back in no time. Maybe even with good news. Lee just pulled his knees to his chest, then hugged them to stay warm. He looked straight ahead and did not say another word. Jordan got out of the car, the seat cover wrapped around his shoulders like a shawl. He tried to ignore the biting wind. He sank to his ankles in snow with each step. The stinging slivers of ice lashed his face, but he kept moving. Soon Jordan reached a rocky place where the snow was not so deep. It was easier to walk there, and he tried to move more quickly. That was a big mistake. Treacherous ice lay beneath the shallow snowpack. Jordan discovered the hidden ice when he slipped, causing his feet to fly out from underneath him. Ugh, he groaned as he came down hard on his back. He thought for sure he had broken a bone. Slowly he got to his feet. He was okay. He hadn't hurt himself seriously, but he knew he had a few more bruises on his backside. Grimly, Jordan moved on. He walked more slowly now, hunched over to minimize the chance of another nasty fall. He struggled up to the ridge. It grew colder and windier at the top. The wind-driven cold pierced his clothing with more intensity. It's that wind chill factor they're always talking about on the Weather Channel, Jordan thought. The wind makes it feel colder than it really was. Jordan could sure attest to that now. He thought bitterly of the environmental biology class. If he hadn't gotten a D, he wouldn't be here where he was now. If old McGuire had just given him a C or even a C minus, Jordan wouldn't have had the big blow up with his father, and he wouldn't have ditched school to drive up to the mountains. Everything would be different. Jordan hated Mr. McGuire for that. Why can't teachers just cut kids a break? He wondered, as if teachers like Mr. McGuire delighted in giving students bad grades. What difference does it make to the teacher if a student gets a C or a D? Either one was a passing grade. Now, if I were failing, that would be another story. But I wasn't. Not yet, anyway. Actually, Jordan thought all classes should be graded on a pass-fail system. He knew he could pass any class with minimal effort. A pass-fail grading system would sure make it easier on kids like him. Jordan got to the top of the ridge. The clouds were lying low in the sky like gray cotton candy. They seemed to be smothering everything below them. Jordan looked around and saw nothing but whiteness. No cabins, just wild, dangerous country covered with snow. Tons and tons of snow. More snow than Jordan thought existed on the entire planet. The disappointment Jordan felt was like a blow to the stomach. He had such high hopes. Again, he peered across the landscape for a hint of a chimney or a roof line or anything. But there was nothing, only endless wilderness. He turned then and started to walk back towards the car, wondering what he would say to Lee. He hated to tell Lee the truth, that there was no warm, cozy cabin where they could take shelter. But finally he decided that facing the truth was better than clinging to false hope. I have to face the truth, he told himself. Why shouldn't Lee? As Lee struggled through the deep snow, his legs ached with the cold. He had once read that dying in a snowdrift was an easy way to go, that you just drop off to sleep and never wake up. Jordan couldn't believe that. He couldn't imagine that any death caused by cold would be easy. The cold hurt. Did you see the cabins? Lee shouted as Jordan reached the car and opened the door again. Jordan could hear the childlike hope in his voice. No, Jordan said, knocking the snow off his feet before getting into the car. I didn't see any sign of the cabin. Lee's face dropped for a second, but then he brightened and said, I think it is snowing a little less now. Jordan could see that even though he had bad news for Lee, Jordan's return had lifted the other boy's spirits. Jordan knew Lee hated being alone. He had few friends, no father, and a mother who often acted as if she regretted ever giving birth to him. All this had caused Lee to spend most of his life alone. That's why Jordan's friendship was so important to him. As long as Jordan was willing to be his friend, Lee would not have to face his enemies, his tormentors, and his fears alone. Anything was tolerable if you had someone to share in your misery. Jordan started to get into the car when he remembered the argument he and his father had had the night before. It was not a big argument, just one of his dad's typical scoldings. One of Jordan's chores was to take the old newspapers to the recycling center. His father had been after him for the last week to get rid of the stack sitting in the garage. Finally, last night, his dad had gotten tired of waiting and had loaded the papers into Jordan's trunk himself. Get rid of these things at the recycling center tomorrow. Do you hear me? His dad demanded. I'm sick of these things being in my way every time I want to work in the garage. See that you drop them off on your way to school tomorrow. If I find them in your car tomorrow night, when I get home, you'll be sorry. Do you understand? Jordan rarely did his chores, and he hadn't done this one. Suddenly his face split into a crazy smile. The truck is full of newspapers, he cried. Lee grinned too, though clearly not sure what he was rejoicing about. Jordan trudged through the snow to the back of the car and dragged out the stack of newspapers. As he reached up to close the trunk, he spotted the tire iron and grabbed that too. Might come in handy for something, he thought. These newspapers will keep us warm, he said as he climbed into the car. We'll stuff them into our clothes. It will be like having another layer of clothing on. Wow, how'd you think of that? Lee said with admiration. Jordan shrugged. I remember old McGuire saying something about that once when we were studying the use of coal as heat, he replied. That in order to cut down on the amount of coal you burn to stay warm, you should wear a lot of layers of clothing. Something about the layers trapping warm air between them. Makes sense, Lee said, following Jordan's lead. He began stuffing newspapers into his clothes. That McGuire's a pretty smart guy, huh? Yeah, I guess, Jordan said. But if it weren't for him and that stupid midterm he sent me, I wouldn't be in this mess. I thought you said it was your dad's fault, Lee said, because he grounded you. Jordan shrugged. It's both of their faults, he said. It was true that he had made a bad decision in coming up here, but he would never have made that decision if it weren't for the midterm report and his dad's anger about the whole thing. He glanced out the window then. Hey, look, it stopped snowing, he said. With any luck, this storm is over, and the sun will come up tomorrow and start melting the snow. Then we can walk out of here. That made him feel a little better, and the fact that he was warming up now after his trek to the ridge. It was far from warm in the car, but wrapped in all those newspapers, it was at least more bearable. Do you think we'll be able to find our way out? Lee asked. Sure, we'll just follow the road we came up on. What's so hard about that? Jordan asked. But it's like 50 miles or something back to town, Lee said. I've never walked 50 miles, have you? Well, we won't have to walk all the way back to town, Jordan said. We just have to walk until we find some signs of civilization, like a campground or something. But without food or anything, in the bitter cold? Lee pressed. Like I said, as we get to the lower elevations, it's going to get easier, Jordan replied. We might even find food, like some fish and streams or something. Berries, maybe. Who knows? We might run into some hikers down there when we get to the foothills, so we won't even have to walk the whole way. They can take us to a ranger station or something. How are we going to cook the fish? Lee asked skeptically. I don't know. I'd eat them raw right now, Jordan said. That's how hungry I am. Lee nodded thoughtfully. You think there might be animals out there that we could eat? He asked. Rabbits or birds or something? Sure, probably all kinds of them, Jordan said, but I wouldn't know how to catch them, and even if I caught one, I wouldn't know what to do with it. Jordan didn't know anything about plucking birds or skinning animals. The only meat he dealt with came in little foam trays with plastic wrap around it at the supermarket. I bet your mom and dad are real worried by now, Lee said. Yeah, probably, Jordan said, but dad's probably mad too. He probably assumes I've done something wrong, and he thinks he'd like to throttle me. Does he ever hit you? Lee asks. No, Jordan said. There were times when he almost did, but it never happened. He always stopped his hand before it connected. Sometimes I almost wish he'd hit me instead of yelling at me all the time. I think it would be easier to take. Jordan, look, Lee said, suddenly pointing out the window. It's Rabbit. Jordan squinted his eyes. At first he couldn't tell what Lee was pointing at, but then he saw it. It was a rabbit, its brown fur standing out against the white snow. I had rabbit meat once, Lee said dreamily. It tastes kind of like chicken. You think we could catch the rabbit? Even if we did, we couldn't cook it, Jordan said. I guess we can worry about that after we catch it. I'll grab this tire iron out of the trunk. Maybe I can throw it at the rabbit and knock it senseless. Let's give it a try. You get around in the back of the rabbit. Try and chase it towards me. Then when it runs by, I'll throw the tire iron at it. Before leaving the car, the boys removed the newspapers from their pant legs. They didn't want to ruin the newspapers by getting them wet with snow. Once outside the car, Jordan said, Okay, Lee, start moving around behind it. Okay, Lee said, moving cautiously. The rabbit had frozen and was watching Lee with its small red eyes. It looked ready to bolt any second. Jordan got into position, and Lee advanced on the rabbit. Jordan's heart was pounding. He could almost taste that rabbit, cooked or not. Shoo! Lee yelled, and the rabbit bounded away, straight in front of where Jordan waited. And that is the end of chapter 3. Are they going to catch a rabbit? In Canvas, answer the question of what are Jordan's reactions to the problems that he and Lee are facing? Who does he blame for his current situations? And is he right or wrong to do that? Hope you enjoyed chapter 3, and I will see you back here for chapter 4.